Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I'm so delighted to welcome Jessica A. McMinn onto the podcast today to talk about her novel, The Ruptured Sky.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Sarah and Lily. It's very exciting to be here.
Thank you for coming on, especially because I know the time zone shenanigans between us and you makes recording not fun or easy to schedule.
Look, I've had worse, so this is actually not too bad.
Oh, good to hear it. Well, quick, roughly 5-minute intro before we get started on the book conversation. What's something great that happened recently? I usually pick on Sarah because she ought to know the question is coming.
Yes, I ought to know the question is coming, and I always forget to prepare an answer for this. But in this case, I do have an answer. Technically, I used it on another episode, but that was Patreon exclusive, so I feel like I can use it again. I visited Lily over the weekend. I went to Seattle, and we had lots of fun. So that's my good thing.
It was very good.
Yes.
Well then, riffing off of that, my good thing will be that we got oysters while you were here. My good thing is not that I saw you, that we got oysters.
I mean, that's fair. Really, my good thing is that I saw your cats.
Mm-hmm. And Jessica, how about you?
My good thing is, it's not really an achievement kind of thing, but my son finished at preschool on Friday, so he's off to start kindergarten. So I guess elementary school on the 6th. So that's been a big little milestone there. So that was a nice little event we've had happening for boys growing up.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Or I guess, please pass my congratulations along.
I will.
Yes, thank you.
Well, like, it's not so much he graduated as they've just kicked him out because he's starting school in 2 weeks. But yeah.
What is everyone drinking tonight? Or for me, it's tonight. Yeah.
I am drinking red wine. I felt that was appropriate to the world of The Ruptured Sky. They drink wine in it, so I am drinking wine.
There's a line specifically, servant is like, oh, do you want beer, wine, or ale or something? And he was like, always wine.
I would have had wine, but it is 1 o'clock in the afternoon for me. So
Fair.
I have a caramel latte. So just to get me through the afternoon.
Sounds delicious, though.
Coffee is good.
Coffee's always good.
I am also drinking red wine in honor of Kyo. This is a book podcast where we talk about books. And other than The Ruptured Sky, which we are about to talk about at length, has anyone read anything good lately?
I am still reading Tolkien's letters. I am 6%. I think. I don't know actually what letter I'm on. It's like late 20s. 26. I have read 26 of Tolkien's letters.
Wow.
Does it give you, like, how people responded? Is there any context at all? Or is it just him going, I had a sandwich for lunch today?
So we don't see the response, but there is sometimes like an editor's note about why he was writing this letter and who the recipient was. But it would be interesting to see, like, the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't get that.
How about you?
I just finished reading the last book of Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. So I'm, like, still in mourning from having finished that. And also I just want to, like, start over again, but it's like 15 books. I'm a slow reader, so it's a mammoth undertaking, but yeah, wow, that blew me away.
I've heard that it's very good, but I've also been too intimidated by how tragic people say it is.
Yeah, it's pretty dense, but I guess, like, because it is broken up into the 5 trilogies and the 1 quartet kind of thing, it's got, like, good pause points.
Mm-hmm.
So you can, like, just, read a couple and then step away from it and then come back and load up on Trauma again and then go back and reset. So, which is what I did. I've been reading them over a couple of years, just sort of a series at a time. Otherwise, yeah, I'm pretty sure you would destroy your soul.
That's kind of the impression that I got.
They're really cool.
I am still working my way through Misery by Stephen King. I don't like it more now than I did before.
It's quite a miserable time then.
Yes, exactly. I realized what the problem is that Stephen King, because I have never liked any of his books, I've read several. I keep trying. He's very good at making me hate characters that I can tell I'm supposed to hate. He is not very good at making me like characters, even when he is trying his damnedest.
Yeah.
And that is not a fun reading experience for me.
Yeah, I've only read the first book of The Dark Tower, and I just could not really care about any of the characters.
No.
Like, interesting story. I enjoyed it enough, but yeah, the emotional connection definitely didn't hit home.
Yeah, same.
I think that's where I fell with that book too, which is the only Stephen King that I've read.
It's like his plots are interesting, but I just can't. Just don't. No. Anyway, he'll probably get another chance because he's such a like cornerstone author. Then I'll just waste more of my time.
So many options too. I mean, how many books did you have?
Yeah.
But
anyway.
Talking about books with characters we did care about.
Yes. Good transition.
Yes. Like we mentioned, we are here to discuss The Ruptured Sky. We found in the course of doing this podcast that genre definitions are very personal. They vary quite broadly from person to person. Would you tell our listeners what genre you feel The Ruptured Sky is and why?
I think it's sort of an epic dark fantasy. So we've got enough elements of, your traditional epic sort of high fantasy world building and that adventure, like a lot of those classic tropes. But we get, no one's really good. There's no, noble, bright character. They're all a bit dark and self-serving, really. So they're sort of definite, and it's quite violent and not pleasant for some people. So, yeah, it's definitely got those dark elements, which, some people classify that as being, on the grimdark end, but I don't think I quite fall that far on it. But, yeah, I think it's definitely got the epic dark fantasy.
Okay, I was kind of shocked when I saw some of the reviews describing it as grimdark, because to me, my weird personal definition of that genre is a sense of hopelessness. It's grimdark. There's no way that good things could happen. And granted, we've only read the first book in, I believe it's a quartet, or will be.
Quartet, yeah.
So there is still space for things to go very wrong, but I am still at this point feeling hopeful for our characters. It's possible they could do it. I wouldn't call that grimdark.
Yeah, I think when I early sort of pitched it to readers, I did go hard on the grimdark because everyone's like, right, you've got morally great characters, it's a bleak, it's a hard world. So yeah, it's that element of hope that it seems to be a debated area of where grimdark falls. It's just one of those hard to define genres. I've seen stuff that they're like, oh yeah, that's grimdark. I've seen people say Lord of the Rings is grimdark.
Interesting.
No. Yeah. So it's just, they're sort of very, depends on, what specific points of grimdark definition that people draw on, but definitely dark.
Yeah. And so as you're embarking on a journey of writing this fairly dark series, and you just read Robin Hobb, are you generally a reader of darker fantasy?
I think so. So I've actually really only sort of deep dive into reading probably only the last sort of 5 or 6 years. I've always read, but purposely read specific things rather than just I feel like I'm going to read a book. I think because as you go through school and uni and everything, you're just reading, it's homework. So even though I liked doing it, it was never something I did because it was too much in the realm of study. So I definitely have always liked dark things. So I played a lot of video games and manga and anime, and I generally liked the more dark sort of violent ones. So that's definitely sort of elements that I'm drawn to in both books and other media that I consume. So I read the occasional, very occasional, rom-com. You just have to have a palate cleanse every now and again. But it's pretty much all dark and twisty. The more I can throw my emotions, the better.
I am someone who typically does not gravitate toward the darker end of the fantasy spectrum. I like my happy ending. I don't necessarily want my heart ripped out all the time. What draws you to the grittier stuff?
I think it's probably because if we're like going to do like alignment stuff for people, I'm probably very much like that lawful good person. So to me, I'm drawn to it just because it's so different to the experience I know as life of being the by the book kind of person. So yeah, I always really like characters that just, don't give a shit. They do stuff because they want to, not because they're thinking about everyone else's feelings or what they should be, what they're expected to do kind of stuff. So yeah, I kind of like that's sort of one reason why I gravitate to it. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know why else I like I just really like the emotional investment, but I do like happy endings. Like, I don't think I could read a book that just ended like completely shit, like everyone died kind of thing. Like, I think you do have to have some sort of positive ending to it rather than just bleakness, but it's quite fun to go through the ringer.
You want to rip your heart out.
Yeah. How you know you're alive.
It is still escapism in a way, just sort of that, just a different flavor of it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, like I couldn't read like a modern, sort of like wartime
Oof.
contemporary kind of thing. Like I couldn't do anything like that. I don't really like contemporary stories unless they are like a rom-com kind of thing, like they're specifically light and just brain candy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think with fantasy, because you're getting that escapism like straight off the bat, you can handle so many hard, difficult things that you couldn't handle in a contemporary setting just because it is so far removed.
Absolutely, yeah.
So this book is told from 4 different perspectives. We have Kyo, Amika, Ray, and Kriya. Can you tell us a little bit about your decision to include multiple POV characters?
This is actually quite like a weird one. So I've been writing, like I was writing this story for like 20 years, like literally most of my life. And I'd always only ever told it from Amika's perspective. So it was just a single point of view. And it only occurred to me like probably in about 2014 or 15 when I picked up Song of Ice and Fire that you can actually do that. Like it never occurred to me that I could use different perspectives rather than just the main character as such. So that was when it sort of really branched out. I'm like, look, I think the other characters have a lot more to tell and add to the story, which is where I really started to bring in the extra perspectives. So Kriya was the last one to be added. I sort of added his and then took it out because he's just with the party so often. Like, does he really give that much extra to the story? And then I ended up sort of bringing him in later. So he was a difficult character to write because I guess I hadn't spent as much time in his headspace as I had the other 3.
I do think, I mean, I enjoyed reading all of the different perspectives, and I do think that it added like a depth to the narrative and what they were going through to see what each character was thinking at different points in the novel. So I'm glad you added them in, basically.
Me too.
Oh, I actually think Kriya was my favorite of the perspectives, but I'm biased because I liked his mother's plotline so much. And so I was just like, Kriya, you're fine. Talk about your mom.
You're in a little minority. Kriya's the one that everyone's like, oh, Kriya.
Really? I thought Kriya was great. I think he was probably my favorite too.
Excellent. See, like, I mean, every character's not going to resonate with everyone, which I guess is also another like benefit of the multiple perspectives is you do get the ones that are going to gravitate to different stories within the one narrative more than others.
Absolutely. It makes me think we should make one of the old school Quizilla quizzes. Which point of view character are you?
Miss those. Oh my god. Showing our age there.
So you mentioned that you've been working on this story for quite a while. I think you just said 20 years?
I first came up with the idea of it's very different than what it was, but I guess I first came up with the character of Amika when I was about 13 or 14.
How much did you plan this plot then? Was it you had the plot and then have sort of been adjusting it since then?
I'm like, not at all. I don't plan. So I'm working on book 3 at the moment, and I'm sort of, because now I'm working on it, I'm starting to get what's happening in the book. But book 4 is just like blank at the moment. I don't make things easy for myself in that, but I guess I always had the character of Amika was like a princess that didn't want to be a princess. and, you know, ran off to do her own sort of thing. And she had magic powers. And that's probably one thing that's really stayed the same. And there was always like that magic quest, the magic object to find the magic quest. I think at the time I was reading David Eddings' Pawn of Prophecy, Belgariad. So I think that sort of was like the real quintessential magical object, save the world kind of story. So that's how it sort of started. And then, yeah, it really just snowballed and changed quite a lot.
I do want to ask about some of those changes, but we'll save that for the spoiler question because I feel like that is going to be a spoiler conversation. Yeah. But the world that the story takes place in is quite expansive. Like, you've clearly put a lot of thought into it. What was your world building process like?
I don't actively sit down and do stuff like that. So like when everyone's like, oh, the world building's amazing, I'm like, oh, is it? Like, I just slap some ideas together, whereas like people, like other writers I've spoken to, they've got like spreadsheets and all of these things about where they've drawn all the inspiration from and real in-depth like history and lore and everything that they've kept on the side, like a big appendix and everything. But yeah, I try to do that because I'm like, yeah, I want it to be really vivid and lifelike and everything. But I sit down to do it and I'm just like, oh, it feels like homework. So I pick up bits of ideas. Like I've tried to not obviously culturally appropriate things, but tried to give that sort of like diversity in the world. So, for example, style is Asian coded area, and so like I lived in Japan for 5 years, so that's sort of like built up sort of lived cultural experience from that, and just sort of just observing bits and pieces that I never set out to world build as such. Like I just sort of go through life and then be like, oh, that's cool, and pop it in.
It happens organically.
It does, yeah. So I didn't have a sort of a process to sit down and say, right, I'm going to map out a pantheon, or I'm going to say like put all this is the history of this kingdom and things like that. So just as I needed to know it, I thought about it kind of thing as I was writing.
Well, I think that sort of answered my next question, but I'm going to pose it anyway because it was a good question. Because this is a longer series, you often need to have a more fleshed out world than a standalone book. And so it sounds like the answer to how you avoid front loading that information is just including it as it's necessary and not going, I had this idea, so you have to know it right now.
So when I was doing like early beta work with one of my friends from uni, he was actually very good at identifying something like, hey, this is great information, but we don't need to know that now because we are in certain characters' headspaces. Like they're not suddenly going to start giving you a history of a place that they've lived in all the time kind of thing. Like, so he was very helpful in being able to say, right, I can see why you're putting that here because you've obviously just thought about it, but the character wouldn't be thinking about it. I guess because you do see that there's so much world building that people do, but, you know, only like 2% of it ends up in the book. It's like with research where you do pages and pages and pages of research and you're only going to use like a sentence of it because you don't want it to feel like a history retelling or anything like that. So that's sort of, just as it needed to be known, but not necessarily as depending on what the character needed as well. Like if it's a familiar setting, the character's not going to pay too much attention to it. So I'm not going to describe it.
You have 2 prequel novellas for this series, I believe. When do you think a reader should check those out? Like, should they read it before book 1? Should they read the series, what's available, before checking out the prequel novellas? What's your opinion?
I wrote them both after I wrote The Ruptured Sky, as we often do. Like, I would definitely read the second novella, The Call of the Huntress, before reading book 2. So there is a character in that comes back in the second book. So I think that would be a good place to read it. But I think they could both easily be read before starting book 1. But it's kind of like with anything with a prequel, like you get something out of it depending on where you read it. Like if you read it first, then you're getting more out of the novel because you've got background information. But when you go back and read the prequel, like you can think, and like find stuff that makes more sense. So like there's quite a big thing in the other novella, The Collector's Lost Things, that is directly related to stuff that has happened prior to The Ruptured Sky. So yeah, either way you read that, I think you would still be able to get a like, moment.
Well, I ask because it reminds me a little bit about my experience reading The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, which has the prequel novel. And I read that about halfway through the series, and I think that was the wrong point to read it. And I don't think that you should start with that prequel novel. So whenever I see a prequel novella, I'm like, oh, when should I be reading this?
I think they could, I really think that in this case they could be read as an entry point to it. And then it's like, oh, yeah, I'm interested. I'll read the book that I have to pay for because the novellas are free. And then, or you can just say, yeah, no, don't care. But then it's also like, okay, I want to know more about how this character got here, because the novellas were published before I published The Ruptured Sky. I was able to make sure there were consistencies or Easter eggs and things in them as well. So, yeah, I think they can be read at either point. One way to answer that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there are currently 2 published novels in this series, plus the 2 novellas.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of any ideas that you learned from writing this book that you brought to writing book 2?
Don't take 20 years to do it. So it was one. So I guess, it was to really... So writing book 1, it was like I'd usually get to about, say, 60,000 words in and be like, this is shit, I'm going to scrap it, and then start again. So I think I restarted the novel probably about 5 or 6 times from scratch, the first one. And I'm like, I can't keep doing that. I can't release a book every 20 years. So I really had to just get on with, I need to write and not go back and read. Like, I just need to write and get through it. And that saw book 2 get done in 12 months.
Wow.
But what I learned from that is don't do that. Because that's just asking for burnout. Like, I think I tried too radically to overhaul my writing process between the 2 books. And that book 2 just killed me because it was released 12 months after book 1. So, it was a huge learning curve of what not to do.
Sounds like there's a middle ground.
Oh, how different would that book have been finished 20 years ago, though?
Oh, it would have been so bad. It would have been so bad because I was, 13.
Yeah.
And I just watched Lord of the Rings and I was like, whoa. So it would have been terrible. And I do actually have old drafts lying around somewhere and I'm like, oh my God, the cringe. It was called The Blade of Shadows. And it was...
Well, I think we are about ready to get into the spoiler section.
Oh, goody.
But before we get over there, I have a question for Sarah, which is, who should read this book?
You should read this book if you're in the mood for a dark, but not grimdark, pessimistic fantasy where bad shit happens to people who are trying their best.
That is such a good summary. The new tagline. Bad shit happens to people who are trying their best.
Yes. They don't always do great things, but they're trying.
That's right.
Yeah.
This episode of Fiction Fans is brought to you by Fiction Fans.
That's us. We really appreciate our patrons because otherwise we fund this podcast entirely ourselves.
Patrons can find weekly bonus content, monthly exclusive episodes, and they have free access to our biannual zine, Solsticia.
You can find all of that and more at patreon.com/fictionfanspod. Thank you for all of your support.
The remainder of this episode contains spoilers. And my first question, because I am now dying to know, you've talked about how this book went through some pretty drastic changes because you initially came up with it when you were much younger. So what exactly changed? Like, how different is it from the idea that you first conceived when you were 13?
Wow. So originally, Kriya and Amika was like a love story. And I panned that. So I went through a phase, and I still kind of am regretting it now, given what the current market trends are with romantasy. But I didn't want to have a female character whose sole purpose was to, like, save her lover or to find her lover or just everything about a man. Didn't want that. So that sort of came off the back of Star Wars, the prequels, where, like, Padme was really cool and, like, awesome. Sort of political figure, and then she like died of a broken heart. Like, sort of bullshit is that? So I totally scrapped all notion of having it. I was going to have like super, super slow burn. And then I'm like, that doesn't even feel right for her. And that's when I realized that Amika was actually asexual. And she just is, she doesn't, it's not a priority for her. She doesn't feel that, like, she cares about Kriya, but not sort of like in a way that she really feels that she is expected to. So yeah, she's got that sort of complicated relationship with that, which she will explore in the later book. So that was a big change. Keo was also straight originally, and people laugh about that one too because of what he gets up to.
He's very straight in the published novel.
No, he's really not. And Ray also had like an enemies to lovers romance arc with, so Kriya had a little sister, so they had like a enemies to lovers romance arc, so that changed. Yeah, they were probably the real big ones, like on a character level, but yeah, plot wise, like it probably one thing that did stay the same was like the two realms, like the realm adjacent, there was like was a shadow realm originally because I was 12 and sort of like developed that as like the antithesis of the current world. And so I like fleshed that sort of, I guess, the mythology underwent a fair bit of overhaul throughout the time. But yeah, that's probably the main things that changed were the characters and their motivations and interests.
Oh, I am a sucker for romance, so I do kind of miss the book we never got, where there was more of a romance plotline. But
Lots of pining.
Not every book can be romance. You gotta have variety.
No.
Yeah.
I am so happy that Amika is ace. Like, so I'm glad that was the change.
Yeah, and I've heard that from a couple of other readers as well. Like, they've just like, this is so good. And I've got one that gives me some sort of sensitivity feedback as well, of sort of how I handle it, especially in book 2, where she really starts to unpack how she feels. So yeah, I'm glad I made that change. It felt right for her, but also lamenting what could have been. Just given what the market is like at the moment. But
so was there ever a version where Kyo and Amika's mother and Tai, Kyo's servant, don't die? Because I was heartbroken when they die off screen. I was sad.
Yeah, so both of those only happened in the last draft. They were like the sort of final things that came in. So yeah, well, originally like Tylus didn't exist. So Kyo's storyline went through a lot of overhaul as well. So when he ended up being gay and was like pining for Ray the whole time, he was like celibate, like he just sat around and moaned. And so what one of my beta readers was like, he doesn't do anything. His storyline needs more action. And I'm like, action, you say? So my brain just went, right, well, he needs to have sex, a lot of it. And that's sort of a big change that underwent for him. And that was when I also brought in his little servant that sort of, went along with him on his escapades, so to speak. So yeah, Tylus was actually a new character, and yeah, one of my early betas was like, yeah, he should like die really impactfully.
he should live. He should live and not break my heart.
Yeah, and same with the mother. Like, that was also a last draft addition to really, push things over the edge for dear Kyo. So
yeah, Amika's moment that she has to reflect when she first finds out that her mother has been brutally murdered was just so, like, I had to stop for a second and like process that. There was a lot going on there. And she had especially with Amika trying to balance, like, there's this prophecy that she's supposed to fulfill, but she also has duties, on a more governmental level. That she goes through the ringer in this book.
Yeah, and like, I guess in that point, like, she really starts to realize that, you can't just do what's right for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's just not how life works. So, and she's, starting to see the consequences of what was essentially a selfish move, like, which I'm sure we all probably would have made in her situation, given who she was supposed to be marrying. But it's sort of like, well, everything does have a consequence, and this one had quite a big one. and just sort of, gives her more weight on the, well, can I really say no to this prophecy thing? What's going to happen if I don't do it, thing as I didn't do the last thing I was supposed to. And look how that turned out.
So Lily and I had some off-screen debate over who the main characters of this novel were. And I think we ultimately like landed on Amika and Kyo for the reasons why you've just expressed. Like their motivations in the beginning change pretty drastically by the end, over the course of the book, where they realize that they can't just take the selfish option, which they have been doing. Would you say that they're the focus of the series as a whole?
I would say Amika is the glue. Like, it does really follow, like, especially the prophecy does follow her. Like, she's the one driving that. Kia sort of has his own adventure, and I think his main turning point is probably in book 1, but he does have a bigger role in book 2 because he is sort of off on his own, so he's got more things that he has to sort of navigate through them. But I guess looking at it that way, he does have quite a big role to play in the first book, but I think it does sort of, it will probably backseat a little bit moving forward because he's not part of it as such. He's just along for the ride with all
He's
the
had
crazy
his story.
shit that's happening around him. His story. He's still there. He's still relevant. He still has agency, but he's not. Yeah, he's not involved in the prophecy, so to speak. So he's just there. But we still like to torment him. So
something that I really liked was, during this whole conversation about them just kind of growing up and realizing that actions have consequences and you can't always be selfish, was how even-handed their quote-unquote selfish actions were. I mean, we as the readers obviously see the horrible consequences of what they've done, but if you think of it from a fantasy novel perspective, like the young woman running away from an awful marriage is almost always the hero choice.
Yeah.
And so seeing that other side of like, it's not an unreasonable thing to do, it does still suck in the long run. It's very interesting.
I think it's like looking at the whole, being selfish has always been labeled like a terrible thing to be, but it's also kind of like, it's important. You need to be selfish sometimes. Like, sure, there might be consequences, but what are the consequences going to be if you didn't take the selfish action kind of thing? So, what would Amika's life have been like if she didn't run away? And then what would have happened with everything? Would it have been worse? Would it have been better? Like, you don't know. It's just that sort of choice that you had to make in the moment. And I think, the selfish choice is always very stigmatized, which is not always fair. I mean, sometimes it is, absolutely. I like to think that I'm not an overly selfish person, but maybe I am, which is why I'm defending it so staunchly. But also, I don't know.
Well, we compare that to Kriya, who is sort of an aggressively unselfish character, especially at the beginning. And that's not really better. He has to put up with his grandfather, who was miserable.
Yeah, so I guess we see the other end of it, where he's just like, I don't do anything for myself, and it's a disaster. And then he starts doing stuff for himself, and it gets even more disastrous. So it's just, poor Kriya, he can't win.
Yeah. Oh, I really wanted to hit Gray the entire book. I was so glad when Amika stood up to him.
Yeah, I didn't want to have the stereotypical, gentle old man mental kind of thing. It's like, well, what if he's just an asshole? Like a narcissistic, self-driven asshole, and really kind of just fucks them over by not telling them the whole situation. And so his sort of whole thing, and I guess a running theme of the whole story is really that embodiment of when does the end justify the means? And that's pretty much who Gray is. He's very much it doesn't matter what happens, I need to get this outcome. So I think that sort of does play in a lot of the storylines. Is when is it justified?
Yeah.
I mean, for all that he was an asshole and I hated him and was really glad to see Amika stand up to him, he was still really compelling to read about because, like, I mean, he does have a point about this prophecy. Like, he's not making that up. I don't
What
know.
is that meme? Why are you booing me? I'm right. That was great, I felt.
Yeah,
The whole book.
basically. Like, can you talk a little bit about keeping his character compelling to read about while he's so antagonistic to the heroes, but he's not necessarily a villain? Like, he's in this very morally gray kind of area. And I didn't intend that to be a pun, but I guess that is kind of a pun. I'm sorry.
I needed to balance it. Like, he needed to be likable enough because obviously the characters needed to be invested in what he was saying. So he had to have some element of likability about him or believability in what he was doing. But I just didn't want him to be like a cut and dry mentor kind of character. So looking at ways that would undercut that by making him sort of like a real abusive parental figure for Kriya, and just really having not give a fuck about anything that wasn't his goal on there. So great, he's doing the right thing, like he's doing the noble thing, like stopping the world getting usurped by a pretender god. He's just going about it really badly.
Yeah.
Which, is, again, bad things happen to people who are trying their best. But he knows what they need to do, and I think and the characters around that understand that, like, yes, this is probably the right thing to do, but, like, holy shit, did you stuff this up?
Especially when we meet Kaela,
Mm.
his daughter, and Kriya's mother, who, as I mentioned in the beginning, is probably my favorite. I loved her so much. The hell that woman went through.
Oh, yeah.
Which one of the prequel novellas is about her? And if neither, when is that coming?
Good point. Look, I never actually thought about giving her a full backstory.
It might just be a short story. It might not be a whole novella, but I just like everything about her. And this is probably also the romantic in me coming out.
She had the love story,
Yeah.
and it fell apart.
It's a tragedy.
Very tragic. Yeah,
but she lands back on her feet. I mean, I think it really would be a really interesting story to tell.
She gets up and, well, she sort of, tried to give him the final fuck you back at him, and the thing is, he was so driven by one purpose, and she took that away to get back at him. So, I guess I think I have undervalued her as the writer even, and sort of sat down and thought, what has she actually been through?
Or maybe
she does come back. She will appear later
for a rebound. I'm holding out hope.
Again.
Yeah, she deserves a rebound. So, while you were in the process of writing this novel, were there any moments or scenes that surprised you?
Probably the torture scene in the dungeon. Like, that was not something I originally had in there. So, that was sort of a dark path to go down that I hadn't expected. I'm like, you know what, bits. So, let's do that.
Yeah.
That was difficult to write. Like, I'm not a monster. That actually was difficult to put onto page and sort of try to handle in a way that's not just like torture porn. So I hope I towed the line well enough there, but not had anyone be overly complaining about it. So it mustn't be too bad on that. But I guess I get surprised all the time because, and I know you probably hear this from any time you talk to writers, is they're like, the characters just take over. But like, they do. For someone that doesn't, like, I don't outline and I don't put, like, my outlines might be like a dot point being all like, they go to A to B, or some very brief sort of snippets of things that have to happen, rather than like a scene by scene breakdown, which I know a lot of authors that outline do. So I do get surprised on the daily when I'm writing. I'm like, okay, we're doing this now, right? Let's just carry on then, because that's just what feels right in that moment. It might go back and get edited out or changed again, but there is certainly, all the time. Didn't expect that to happen, and I'm like, okay, let's go with it. Ray with the guard when he's trying to break into the dungeon, where he's like, oh yeah, I'll just go fuck this guy to get in. Like, okay, that works. That tracks really. So we just carry on.
I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
You do. It's just business, man.
You mentioned not getting negative feedback about the torture scene, and it made me realize it must be a strange experience getting feedback on the first novel in a series while you're working on the rest of it. Has that affected your writing at all, or do you just kind of try to separate it from while you're working on future books?
Everyone always says, don't read your reviews, they're for readers, they're not for authors. But like, oh no, I'm like pathetic. I like refresh Goodreads like once a week to see if I've got any new reviews because I'm self-absorbed apparently. But I think there is merit in all types of feedback. Like I think there are things like, so if I did, for example, here, like if there were reviews saying like, wow, this is just gratuitous, and I'm like, okay, so maybe it's not just the wrong people reading it, is that I'm not handling it properly, would be what I would take from that. Whereas if I've got someone that's like, oh, this book was so violent, and I'm like, there's so much swearing. Okay, well, they're not the audience, is sort of the kind of thing that I look for. So it's just more on feedback, I guess, of how certain things are handled, not necessarily the content. So like that sort of things that I would keep aware on and probably act on if, became aware that things were just not necessarily unnecessary, but just not handled well. Not that like I'm going to go back and republish book one or anything like that. Like it's out there now, but it's like I still think that there's merit in it to learn about even how things are handled moving forward with stuff. So yeah, I guess you get the moment of like, oh well, I wish I didn't do that, but well, too bad for sad. It's out there now. I can't do anything about it, so just move on. So, because I get people being like, oh, I hate Kriya, he's so boring, he doesn't do anything, he just whines, and I'm like,
Well, they're wrong.
Yeah.
So,
for Kriya.
Justice for Kriya. So, you talked a little bit about how part of this book is kind of an exploration of at what point do the ends stop justifying the means? What would you like readers to take away from the book?
Oh, that's a really deep question. Going to require thought. I guess I didn't write with any intention to say I want people to, reevaluate their opinion on something or anything. Like I certainly haven't put any conscious thought into what I want people to achieve it. Like I just wanted to write a story that was hopefully enjoyable, but just I know it's a cop-out answer.
No, I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying, I just want people to enjoy the story.
Yeah, like if they take something away from it, great. But I guess I haven't specifically aimed to put a thing. I think sort of being there is like that sort of, what I write in some of my earlier things. It's like looking at, say, the balance between, duty and personal want or obligation, expectations, and sort of just navigate. I think that is relatable to everyone. We all have things that are expected of us. And if we don't go that way, we don't live up to those expectations or follow the path that people think that we might. Again, look, I wrote this when I was in high school, so it was like, oh, it's so hard, I can't get good grades, I'm a disappointment, and no, I don't live up to the expectations of everyone. There was all that teenage angst probably going underneath it when I wrote in the really early stages of planning it. But look, I think that is a human experience we can all relate to. I think we all feel like we let people down sometimes and we look back and say, oh shit, I really did make the wrong decision. And sometimes you can't fix it. You can't make amends for it. You just have to move forward, which I guess is sort of where Amarià is. She can't make people undead. Sorry, she can't bring change things like her, going home and even her going back and marrying Reminisce. That's not bringing people back. And that's not undoing anything that she's done, but it's kind of just shows that it can be futile to make attempts to change stuff, and you just have to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's adulthood, right? Dealing with the consequences of your actions. Luckily, I haven't destroyed any countries, so I think I'm doing okay.
We're all doing better than Amarià.
I fully believe that shit would have gone down with Remanus even if she had married him. I mean, he's a pretty bad guy. I don't think her marrying him would have saved countries, really.
Oh, God, I just would have put everything on a different path because he had his own agenda with having Amika, like, married and turned over to the tower. So it would have been, like, probably the same outcome, just a different path.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So justice for Amika too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I guess, yeah, it's like you can't always lament your bad decisions either because sometimes you're screwed no matter what you do. So you just have to move forward. There's this positive note for it.
Yeah. Try your best. Just keep trying your
Try
best.
your best. Bad shit will happen, but just try your best.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It has been
Pleasure.
so wonderful having you. Normally, I would ask if you could give us any teasers about your current projects, but I sure do hope it's more of this.
So I am currently working on book 3. So I did take pretty much a year off last year just to recover from the trauma I inflicted on myself of trying to write a whole book in a year. Well, write, edit, and publish in a year. So I've just sort of come back to it now. So I'm feeling pretty positive. So coming into book 3, there's going to be 2 new perspectives that'll be joining the cast. So we'll go up from 4 to 6 characters that will follow. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to be working on that now. Feeling good about it. Finally, again.
Well, I can't wait. Can you tell our listeners where you can be found on the internet so that they can hear updates from you, buy all of your other books?
Yep. So my website, jessicamcminn.com, has my main links to where you can get 2 free novellas for this series, as well as a little online shop where there's some merch and signed copies available. I'm mostly active on Instagram at Jessica A. McMinn, and Blue Sky is probably my other main one, again at Jessica A. McMinn. That's pretty much where I'm found everywhere. So if you look up any of those handles, I think I'm on TikTok, but I don't use it. I'm on Twitter, but I don't use it. But if you feel the need to follow me there anyway, you can find me there, Jessica A. McMinn. No dots, no spaces.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on to chat with us. This has been lovely.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad you enjoyed your time with my little book.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Blue Sky and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com or leave a comment on YouTube.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find exclusive episodes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye.